My name's Jake. I'm 29, and I've learned the hard way that nothing poisons a family quite like money, especially when they think you didn't earn it. I didn't come from money, and neither did they. We all grew up in the same cramped two-bedroom apartments, hand-me-down clothes, bulk cereal in the pantry, and birthday parties where the gifts were more thoughtful than pricey, like a basketball from the dollar store or a pair of socks wrapped in old newspaper. We all knew how to stretch a dollar. But somewhere along the way, my relatives started seeing me not as family, but as a wallet with legs. I'm not the loud, flashy type. I never have been. While my cousins were out every weekend in college blowing their student loans on parties and designer sneakers, I was in my dorm room building a scrappy little software startup with 3 equally broke friends. We didn't have an office or funding or any clue what we were doing, but we stuck with it. I coded in libraries, cafes, even laundromats, anywhere with Wi-Fi. I took online classes on finance, marketing, anything that would keep us afloat. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't posting success quotes or Lamborghini pictures on Instagram. I was just trying to build something that worked. Fast forward 5 years, and that scrappy little startup got bought out by a mid-sized tech company for a life-changing amount. I can't name numbers here, but let's just say my cut alone was in the 8-figure range. Still, I didn't run out and buy a mansion or a Bugatti. I moved into a modest penthouse, nothing ostentatious, and quietly started investing in other companies, mostly startups I believed in. I kept a low profile, didn't quit social media, but I didn't advertise my success either. If you knew, you knew. My parents were proud, especially my mom. She's a second-grade teacher, never once asked me for anything, just cried when I paid off her mortgage. My dad's more old school, ex-army, works in construction. All he said was, "Good. Now you can finally afford to take your mother out for a proper steak." They never changed. But the rest of my extended family? That was a different story. It started with little comments. At Thanksgiving, my Uncle Brian, my mom's older brother, joked, "Look at Mr. Tech Mogul over here. Maybe we should start charging you rent for breathing the same air." Everyone laughed. I chuckled too, even though the tone under his voice made me pause. Then it became, you could help your cousins out. College isn't cheap. Or, you should take the family on vacation sometime. Show us what it's like to fly first class. It was all wrapped in jokes, but I could tell they weren't really joking. The only one who never asked for anything was Liam, my cousin, Uncle Brian's son. He's 17, quiet, artistic, and a bit of an oddball in the family. I've always liked him. He's the kind of kid who paints his sneakers, keeps a sketchbook under his arm, and knows more about Japanese folklore than American football. He doesn't care about labels or appearances. We bonded over shared awkwardness when I was younger, and I always tried to encourage him to stay weird, stay him. This past summer, I found out from my mom that Liam's been working part-time at a hardware store while juggling high school just to save up for art school. His parents weren't helping. In fact, from what I heard, Uncle Brian thought art was a waste of time and wanted Liam to go into something useful like accounting or HVAC. My blood boiled. I remembered what it was like having no support for your dreams. I told my mom I'd take care of it. Liam's birthday was coming up in July. I planned to surprise him. Nothing flashy, just a card, and inside, a personal check for $10,000. It wasn't about the money. It was about showing him that someone believed in his dream and that he didn't have to fight the world alone. I even wrote a note inside. Use this to build something beautiful. Don't let anyone tell you your art doesn't matter. Love, Jake. The party was held at Uncle Brian's house, of course. A small backyard barbecue with plastic chairs, store-bought cake, and those shiny happy birthday balloons taped to the fence. I showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, trying not to draw attention to myself. Immediately, I felt the tension. My aunts gave me forced smiles, my uncles nodded like they were trying not to choke on envy, and my cousins just stared at my watch. One even whispered, "That's a Rolex, right?" I ignored it. Liam was genuinely happy to see me. He lit up when I handed him the card, like he hadn't expected me to come, let alone bring a gift. He said, "Thanks, man," and I watched him tuck it into his pocket like it was gold. He went back to chatting with his friend near the grill, and I smiled, figuring I'd done something good. Then it happened. Uncle Brian spotted the card sticking out of Liam's pocket and snatched it out before he could react. He opened it, read the check, and his face twisted like he'd bitten into a lemon. The whole backyard quieted as he waved the check around and said loudly, "What the hell is this?" Liam stammered. It's from Jake. He said it's for art school. Uncle Brian snapped. We don't need your pity money. Then, in front of everyone, my aunts, my cousins, neighbors, he tore the check clean in half, right down the middle. I swear, even the birds stopped chirping. Liam looked like someone had punched him. His hands hung in the air like he didn't know whether to grab the pieces or pretend it didn't happen. My mom gasped. My dad clenched his jaw. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, completely calm, and smiled. Because that was the moment I knew. That was the exact moment I decided I wasn't going to just walk away and forget it. I wasn't going to send another check or argue about disrespect. No, that moment planted a seed. And over the next few weeks, I quietly nurtured it. I started making phone calls, checking portfolios, and reconnecting with a few corporate contacts. Because I'd seen the logo on Uncle Brian's work shirt. I knew where he worked. And as it turned out, the company he had been with for nearly 20 years, they were struggling, bleeding cash, desperate for a buyout. 2 months later, I walked into their headquarters. Not as a visitor, not as a vendor, but as their new majority stakeholder. And on my first day as CEO, guess who I called into my office? After that backyard birthday scene, you'd think things would cool down, right? Like, maybe the public embarrassment of ripping a $10,000 check in front of your entire family would make someone rethink their actions. Maybe they'd feel a little guilty, or at least tone down the passive-aggressive remarks. But nope. If anything, Uncle Brian doubled down. The very next day, I got a text from my mom. She'd just gotten off the phone with her brother, and apparently he told her I was trying to buy Liam's loyalty because I didn't have kids of my own. Said I was throwing money around to look like a hero and playing the rich uncle to feed my ego. He even accused me of trying to turn Liam against his own father. I stared at that text for a long time. I wasn't even mad. I was baffled. Where was this coming from? The money wasn't a bribe. It wasn't some flex. It was me trying to support a kid whose own parents treated him like a burden. But Brian twisted it into something ugly, something self-serving. And the worst part? He actually believed it. That would have been enough to set me off, but the next few weeks revealed something deeper. Something that made me realize this wasn't just about that check. This was about control, power, pride. Apparently, after the party, Brian had taken Liam's sketchbooks, his actual artwork, and thrown them in the trash. Told him, you want to be a starving artist? Fine. You can start by starving for attention. Liam didn't even tell me. My mom heard it through Aunt Marie, who heard it from one of the younger cousins. The family grapevine, as dysfunctional as it was, still worked. I called Liam that night, asked him how he was doing. He sounded tired, worn out in a way a teenager shouldn't sound. Are you okay? I asked. There was a pause, then it's whatever. I'll just start over. I offered to buy him a new tablet, some supplies, whatever he needed. He thanked me, but politely declined. Said he didn't want to cause more problems. That crushed me. That right there was the breaking point. Because I realized it wasn't just the money Brian had a problem with. It was me. My existence. My success. The fact that I, his younger nephew, the one who used to stutter and couldn't open a soda bottle without spraying myself, had made it, while he was still clocking into a dead-end job he hated. He couldn't stand that I was helping his son in ways he never could, or would. And instead of dealing with that like a grown man, he punished Liam. I started digging. I knew Brian worked for a small regional office supply distributor. Let's call it Fairway Logistics. They'd been around forever, had contracts with schools, small businesses, even a few mid-sized hospitals. Brian had been there for 19 years. He wasn't in upper management, but he'd worked his way up to regional operations lead. He wore that title like a badge of honor, even though the company barely gave him a parking spot. What he didn't know was that Fairway had been bleeding money for the past 3 years. They'd lost 2 major contracts to competitors, their warehouses were outdated, and they hadn't invested in tech infrastructure since the early 2000s. They were ripe for acquisition or bankruptcy. I had a few contacts in private equity and venture capital. Nothing sketchy, just people I'd met over the years. One of them, Tara, owed me a favor. I asked her to run a discreet check into Fairway. Within a week, she sent me a spreadsheet that made my jaw drop. Turns out, not only was Fairway in trouble, but they'd been quietly shopping for buyers. A few offers had already fallen through. Their valuation had dipped low enough that a single investor could realistically acquire a controlling share. I sat there in my apartment, staring at the numbers, rereading them again and again. And then I laughed. Not a maniacal villain laugh. More like disbelief. Like the universe had handed me a blueprint for karma, and all I had to do was follow it. But this wasn't going to be some petty gotcha moment. If I was going to do this, it had to be precise. Legal. Above board. The kind of revenge that left no messy fingerprints. Just the silent satisfaction of knowing that every piece fell into place exactly as it should. So I got to work. Over the next several weeks, I formed a shell company. Let's call it Northbridge Acquisitions. Hired a legal team. Brought in consultants to do a formal assessment. We approached Fairway with interest, but through intermediaries. No one knew who I was. Just another investor group looking to modernize a struggling logistics company. Fairway jumped at the opportunity. By the time the paperwork was in motion, I'd already acquired 51% of the company through stock purchases and debt absorption. It wasn't cheap, but for me, it wasn't about profit, it was about principle. About making sure that the next time Brian ripped something out of someone's hand, it was a cardboard box during his exit interview. But the story doesn't stop there. Because right in the middle of the acquisition process, something else happened. Something that twisted the knife even deeper and confirmed that I wasn't just dealing with a bitter uncle, but a genuinely cruel man. It was late September when I got another call from my mom. She was crying. Not loud sobs. More like that quiet, exhausted kind of crying that parents do when they feel helpless. She told me Liam had run away. Not permanently, just for a day. He'd come home eventually. But the details made my blood boil. Brian had found out about a portfolio Liam was building. Turns out, Liam had been secretly applying to art programs behind his parents' backs. He'd compiled his digital work onto a flash drive, drafted personal essays, even uploaded a few pieces online for feedback. It was his dream, and he was taking real steps toward it. When Brian found out, he smashed Liam's laptop. Not figuratively, literally. Took it into the garage, slammed it onto the concrete, and shouted, "If you want to waste your life, do it without my roof over your head." Then he told Liam to pack a bag and see how far your cartoons get you. Liam ran, took his sketchbook, some clothes, and biked to a friend's place 2 towns over. He stayed there overnight. No one knew where he was. Not his mom, not his siblings. Just gone. When he came back the next day, he was quiet, withdrawn, said he didn't want to talk about it. That was it. That was the final crack in the dam. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand knowing that someone so kind, so gifted, so gentle was being emotionally beaten down day after day by a man who was supposed to protect him. And the worst part? Brian didn't think he was doing anything wrong. He thought he was disciplining his son. Tough love. Reality checks. All the usual justifications people use when they don't have the emotional range to just say, "I'm insecure," and taking it out on you. So I escalated things. I sped up the acquisition, signed the final paperwork, took control of Fairway Logistics 2 weeks later. But before I tell you what happened on my first day as CEO, let me share one more thing. One more betrayal that sealed everything. Because a few days before the takeover, I got an anonymous email. No subject, no name, just an attachment. A scanned image of a handwritten note from Uncle Brian. It was a letter addressed to a private school in town. A recommendation for Liam. Except it wasn't really a recommendation. It was a sabotage piece. It claimed Liam was unstable, disrespectful, and not a good candidate for higher education. It said he had emotional problems, that he was obsessed with cartoons and fantasy, and that he needed discipline, not encouragement. The signature was unmistakable, Brian A. Whitman. I couldn't believe what I was reading. He hadn't just disrespected me. He hadn't just rejected a gift. He hadn't just destroyed Liam's art. He'd actively tried to ruin his future, to burn the bridge before Liam could even take a step onto it. I closed the file, sat in silence for a while. Then I picked up the phone and called HR. "Schedule a staff-wide meeting for Monday," I said. "I want everyone there, especially regional ops." I didn't even raise my voice. Because when the time comes, I want Brian to see my face. I want him to look me in the eye. I want him to realize that everything he built his pride around, his job, his status, his control, wasn't just taken from him. It was taken by the nephew he tried to humiliate, the one he thought he could rip in half. If you'd told me a year earlier that I'd one day be plotting the legal acquisition of a company just to fire my uncle, I probably would have laughed. Not because I didn't think I was capable of it, but because I wasn't that guy. Revenge wasn't in my nature. I was the type to let things go, to let people run their mouths and then move on. But something about Brian changed that. It wasn't just about what he did to me. It was what he did to Liam. The cruelty, the pettiness, the way he used fatherhood like a leash instead of a lifeline. That kind of behavior didn't deserve a second chance. It deserved a reckoning. But even as I took the steps toward reclaiming control, a fair way, of the narrative, of my own damn dignity, I won't lie and say I felt like some action movie hero. Truth is, I felt hollow. Lonely, even. Like I was standing in the middle of a crowded stadium and nobody could see me. See, I thought taking control of the company would feel like a win. A victory. But what it really felt like was exhausting. The night before I took over as CEO, I sat alone in my apartment staring out at the city skyline. Usually, that view gave me a weird sense of calm. All those lights blinking in different windows, like every one of them had a story happening inside. But that night, it just made me feel small. Like I'd built this empire out of spite, and now I didn't know what to do with it. And then came the doubts. That little voice in the back of your head that whispers, "Are you really doing this for the right reasons?" I kept replaying Liam's face in my mind. The quiet disappointment, the resignation in his voice when he said, "It's whatever." I wasn't just angry at Brian. I was angry at myself. For not stepping in sooner. For letting Liam believe that he was alone. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened an old folder on my hard drive. A collection of projects I used to work on back when my startup was still just an idea scribbled on napkins. Wireframes. Brainstorms. Half-finished mock-ups. They weren't worth anything financially, but they reminded me of who I used to be. The hungry kid who stayed up till 4 a.m. eating cereal out of the box and coding until his eyes burned. The version of me who didn't care about titles or revenge or family politics, just building something cool. I stayed up the whole night reworking one of those projects. Nothing fancy, just a small productivity app I'd abandoned years ago. It felt good, like stretching a muscle you forgot you had. By sunrise, I had a working prototype. For the first time in months, I smiled and meant it. Because I remembered who I was without the anger, without the drama. That morning, I got dressed, not in a designer suit, not in anything flashy, just a plain button-up and slacks. I took the subway instead of a car service. Walked into Fairway's headquarters through the front doors like everyone else. Nobody recognized me. Well, not yet. The receptionist greeted me without looking up. "You here for onboarding?" Something like that, I said with a smile. The staff meeting was scheduled for 10:30 sharp. By 10:28, the conference room was packed, low-level employees, middle management, even a couple of the C-suite guys who hadn't already jumped ship. People murmured to each other, wondering what the meeting was about. The rumor mill was already churning. Layoffs? Restructuring? Another buyout? Then Brian walked in, still oblivious, still smirking. He didn't even glance at me as he took a seat near the front, phone in hand, tapping out a message. Probably texting one of his buddies about how boring corporate meetings were. Probably bragging about how he ran the entire warehouse division on muscle and grit. I waited until the room settled, then stepped to the front. "Good morning," I said, calm and steady. For those of you who haven't heard, Fairway Logistics has officially finalized its acquisition by Northbridge Acquisitions. As of today, I'll be assuming the role of acting CEO. The room went quiet, and then it rippled. Some people blinked. Others shifted in their seats. A few glanced at Brian. He froze. He looked up, right at me. Our eyes met, and that's when I saw it. The flicker of recognition. The flush of red crawling up his neck. The disbelief. "Jake?" he said, like he was trying to spit out a piece of rotten food. I gave him a nod. "Good to see you, Brian." He stood up like he'd just touched a hot stove. "This is a joke, right? This isn't funny." "It's not a joke," I said. "Please sit down." But he didn't. He stayed standing, stammering, looking around the room for some kind of lifeline, some familiar face that could back him up. "Why you can't just walk in here and play boss? This company's been my life for 19 years. And now it's mine," I said, still calm. "And trust me, we'll get to your situation in a moment. But for now, let's stay professional." He sat, slowly, like someone sitting down for a funeral. I continued the meeting like nothing happened. Laid out the new vision. Talked about restructuring, tech modernization, roles that would stay, roles that would shift. Everyone else was laser-focused, but I could feel Brian's eyes boring into me like twin lasers the whole time. He was seething, but I wasn't there to humiliate him. Not yet. Because revenge isn't about the punchline. It's about the build-up. After the meeting, I called Liam. Told him I'd taken over the company. Told him Brian knew. Told him, it's done. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, I don't want you to do this for me. I'm not, I replied. I'm doing this because you deserved better a long time ago. Still, I could tell he was struggling. This wasn't some movie for him. This was his dad, his home, his reality. I asked if he wanted to meet for lunch. No pressure. He said yes. We met at a quiet cafe on the east side. He looked thinner than I remembered, more guarded. But when I showed him the prototype I'd built, that silly little productivity app I'd revived the night before, something shifted in his face. He smiled. Not a big smile, but a real one. The kind that starts in the eyes. You made this, he asked. Years ago, I said. Then I forgot why I started. Now I remember. He nodded slowly. I've been sketching again. Just not showing anyone. I'd love to see it sometime. He didn't promise anything, but I could tell it meant something. We talked for an hour. Not about Brian. Not about family drama. Just about ideas. Dreams. Projects. Art. It was the best conversation I'd had in months. And then Liam asked me something I didn't expect. Do you ever get tired of winning? I laughed. All the time. He looked surprised. I don't think success is about winning, I said. I think it's about building something that can't be taken from you. A version of yourself that nobody gets to rip in half. He stared at his iced tea for a minute, then nodded. That moment, that was the real turning point. Not the boardroom, not the buyout. That quiet moment, over lunch, where I realized I hadn't just reclaimed power. I'd reclaimed myself. Over the next few weeks, I focused less on revenge and more on rebuilding. Not just the company me. I went back to journaling. Set boundaries with family. Took long walks without my phone. I even enrolled in a night class on digital art. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to understand what Liam saw in it. I started building again. Not for money. For meaning. I called my mom more. Took my dad out to dinner. We didn't talk about the drama. We talked about life. He asked if I was happy. I said I was working on it. And for the first time, I meant it. But don't get me wrong, the story's not over. Because Brian still worked at Fairway. Still showed up every day like nothing had changed. Still carried himself like the king of a crumbling castle. And I hadn't forgotten the letter. The one he wrote to sabotage his own son's future. The one he thought no one would ever see. The reckoning was coming. And when it did, it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be silent. Surgical. Undeniable. Because sometimes, the best revenge is showing them exactly who you've become. And letting them watch from the outside. When you finally step into power, it's tempting to hit back fast. To march down the hallway, slam the office door open, and give your big, movie moment speech about justice and karma and how the tables have turned. But real power doesn't announce itself like that. Real power smiles, waits, and watches. And then, when the moment is perfect, it pulls the rug out from under them so smoothly they don't even notice they're falling until they hit the floor. So no, I didn't fire Brian the day I became CEO. I didn't humiliate him in front of the entire company or send out a dramatic email with an all-caps subject line like, corporate shakeup. Guess who's out? I didn't even acknowledge him beyond that first meeting. And that, in many ways, was more effective than anything else I could have done. Because for the first time in his career, Brian wasn't important. He wasn't consulted. He wasn't looped into planning meetings. He wasn't invited to strategy sessions. He was just there, dead weight, waiting. And it drove him crazy. He started sending me emails, formal ones at first, asking about project timelines, equipment orders, regional staffing. I responded politely, always professionally, but never included him in anything critical. Then came the knock on my office door. Got a minute? He asked, voice clipped. Of course, I said, gesturing to the seat across from me. What's up? He sat, stiff as a board. I feel like I'm being kept out of the loop. I said. In what way? You know in what way? I've been with this company for almost 2 decades. I've led operations in 3 regions. I deserve to know what direction we're headed in. You're right, I said. You do deserve clarity. We'll be distributing departmental updates by next quarter once the new structure is finalized. He blinked. So that's it. You're just cutting me out. Brian, I said calmly, you're still employed. Still drawing a salary. No one's cutting anything. We're simply assessing what roles align with our future. He stood abruptly. I see how it is. I didn't say anything. Because I didn't need to. He stormed out. Now, I could have just fired him and ended it. But this wasn't about a pink slip. This was about exposure. About peeling back the layers of the man who spent years stomping on his son's dreams while puffing up his own ego. This was about making sure everyone saw what I already knew. That Brian wasn't a leader. He was a liability. So I started digging. Quietly. Methodically. And the deeper I went, the more I found. It started with minor things. Fudged timesheets from warehouse crews. Suspicious overtime approvals. Then came the inventory discrepancies. Hundreds of units missing. Supplies misallocated. Paper trails that didn't add up. At first, I thought maybe it was just sloppy management. But then I found the emails. Buried in archived servers were threads between Brian and a small vendor company, one he'd pushed aggressively for Fairway to contract with over the past year. On paper, it looked like a logistics partner. In reality, it was a shell company. And the mailing address? A P.O. box registered under Brian's wife's name. I had to sit down. He wasn't just arrogant. He wasn't just cruel. He was stealing. Inflated invoices. Ghost shipments. Fake maintenance work billed and signed off by him. All funneled into that shell company. I looped in legal. Then compliance. No leaks. No whispers. We began a full internal audit, but I didn't let it slow down the revenge. Because revenge isn't just about justice. It's about timing. Presentation. Theatrics. And I wanted this reveal to be perfect. In the meantime, I started reshaping the company in small but meaningful ways. I replaced outdated systems, streamlined supply chains, built better dashboards for operations, promoted people from within, hardworking warehouse guys and customer service reps who'd been overlooked for years. People Brian had ignored because they didn't play politics. I made sure everyone saw change happening, and I made sure none of it involved Brian. But the best part? Liam started coming by the office. Not for anything formal, just visits. I let him hang out in the design department. He'd sit in meetings with our branding team, sketch ideas on a tablet I bought him, and quietly observe the creative process. I never introduced him as my cousin, just as Liam, a young artist with potential. The team loved him. One of our UX designers even offered to mentor him. He was blooming again, slowly, cautiously, but he was coming back to life. And Brian had no idea, until one day he saw him. It happened during a Thursday morning coffee run. Brian was walking out of the break room just as Liam was coming in with a junior designer, holding a tablet and talking about UI elements. They locked eyes. Liam stiffened. Brian stopped in his tracks. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked. Liam flinched. The designer, clearly confused, looked between them. "You know each other?" Brian stepped forward. "Answer me." I walked into the hallway just in time. "Problem, Brian?" He turned, face red. "Why is he here?" I looked at Liam, then back at Brian. "He's shadowing the design team," I said. "We're sponsoring a mentorship program for young creatives. It's important work." Brian sneered. "This is a workplace, not some damn art school." "It's both," I said calmly. "And if you have a problem with that, you're welcome to bring it up through the proper channels." He didn't say another word, just stormed off again. But this time he knew. He knew something was coming. And that's when I began preparing for the endgame. The setup. I scheduled a quarterly all-hands meeting. A formal one. Decks. Presentations. The whole corporate show. Everyone in the company would attend, either in person or through video. Department heads were asked to submit progress reports, including Brian. The day before the meeting, I got his report. Sloppy. Vague. Buzzwords with no substance. But that was fine, because I wasn't going to read it. I was going to read mine. And mine had everything. The internal audit was complete. Confirmed fraud. Paper trails. Email evidence. Vendor kickbacks. We had enough for termination. More than enough for prosecution. But I wasn't going to call the cops. Not yet. Because first, I wanted Brian to experience what it felt like to have the floor collapse under you in real time. To watch everything you thought you controlled, your image, your position, your story, be ripped away in front of your colleagues. It had to happen in front of an audience. Because that's where he first embarrassed me. That's where he humiliated Liam. That's where this all started. But this time, he wouldn't be the one holding the check. He'd be the one choking on the truth. And I'd be the one smiling. Not out of spite, but out of peace. Because after everything he did, the lies, the manipulation, the destruction, I was finally going to give him something he couldn't tear in half. The truth. And I'd do it with the same calm voice I used when he first walked into that meeting, and didn't recognize who I'd become. The morning of the company-wide meeting, the air in Fairway Logistics felt thick. Not tense exactly, just expectant, like everyone sensed something was coming, but no one could quite put their finger on what. Employees buzzed around the office in business casual mode. Laptops were charged, coffee brewed stronger than usual, and meeting rooms were booked solid as departments prepped their briefings. For most, it was just another corporate checkpoint. For me, it was the final piece in a very long, very personal game of chess. And Brian? He looked like a man waiting for applause. I saw him standing near the back of the conference room as I walked in. He wore a smug expression, leaning casually against the wall like he owned it. Fresh shave, new tie. Probably imagined this would be his moment of redemption. Maybe he thought I'd come crawling back, desperate for his expertise. Maybe he assumed this was all a misunderstanding I'd clear up, some phase I'd outgrown. But I didn't make eye contact. I just stepped to the front, took a breath, and opened the meeting. "Good morning, everyone," I said, steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here, whether in person or joining remotely. Today marks a turning point in our company's future, and I'm proud to share with you exactly where we're headed." I went through the usual slides, performance charts, upcoming initiatives, recognition of outstanding employees. People clapped politely at all the right moments. Brian leaned in occasionally, probably waiting for his name. And then I paused, clicked to the next slide, and everything changed. "This final portion," I said, "is about transparency. Over the last several months, we've quietly conducted an internal audit of our financial operations. What we found was deeply troubling. The slide displayed a series of redacted invoices, highlighted figures, shell company names, routing numbers. Gasps whispered through the room. "One of our regional managers," I continued, "was discovered to be routing payments through a vendor that doesn't exist. A shell entity used to inflate costs and siphon money from the company." I clicked again. The next slide showed a contract with the vendor's address. A P.O. box, registered under Ashley Whitman, Brian's wife. All eyes turned to him. I still hadn't said his name. He stood up, stiff as a board. "This is bull." I raised a hand. He stopped talking. "I'm not done," I said calmly. "We've recovered nearly every invoice. We've tracked every kickback. We have screenshots, IP logs, time-stamped approvals. Legal has reviewed everything." Brian's face turned an impossible shade of red. "You think you can frame me? You think you can?" I turned to the side of the room, where two members of our legal team stood with security. "I'm not framing anyone," I said. "We have the truth. And now, so does everyone else." The room was silent. You could have heard a paperclip drop. "Effective immediately," I continued, "Brian Whitman is terminated from his position and permanently barred from corporate entry. He will be escorted from the premises. We are also pursuing full restitution through civil litigation. All employees who reported to him directly will have their roles reevaluated and, if applicable, promoted into his former position based on merit." I turned, made eye contact with him for the first time, and I smiled. Not vindicatively, just peacefully. Brian looked around, searching the crowd for support. None came. Even the people who used to laugh at his jokes looked away. Some actually looked relieved. Security stepped forward. He resisted for a moment, tried to say something, but his voice cracked, and all that came out was a hoarse whisper. They walked him out in silence. Just like that. 19 years, gone in 9 minutes. After the door closed behind him, I turned back to the room. "Now," I said, "let's talk about building something better." The rest of the meeting was a blur, questions, restructuring plans, one-on-ones with department heads. But there was a shift in the energy. People weren't scared. They were energized, inspired. You could feel it, that this wasn't just a company under new management. It was a company with a new soul. And Liam? He was watching the meeting from home. I'd sent him the link, gave him the choice to watch or not. I didn't hear from him until later that night. He texted me a photo. It was a sketch, a detailed pencil drawing of a phoenix bursting out of a filing cabinet, wings made of shredded paper and flames curling into spreadsheets. Underneath, he'd written in bold letters, "Some things burn so better things can fly." I stared at it for a long time. I asked if he'd consider turning it into a mural for our creative wing. He replied, "Only if I can sign it." A week later, I got a call from an art school in Chicago. Liam had applied using a revised portfolio. New pieces, fresh designs, a whole new voice. His mentor from our UX team had helped him put it together, and he got in. Full scholarship. He hadn't even told me he applied. I called him that night. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I wanted to do it myself," he said. "But I wouldn't have even tried if you hadn't reminded me I mattered." That hit me harder than anything Brian ever said, because that's what it was always about. Not revenge, not money, not power, just giving the next kid a reason to keep going when the world told him to give up. 3 months later, Liam left for school. We had dinner the night before. My parents came. It was quiet, intimate, no big fanfare. He gave me a drawing before he left. It was me, standing in front of a building with my name on it, holding a check torn in half. And in the corner, in small letters, he'd written, "Thanks for believing in me, even when my dad didn't." I still keep it framed in my office. People walk by it all the time and ask what it means. I just smile and say, it's a reminder of where we started. As for Brian, he tried to sue, claimed wrongful termination. The judge laughed him out of the courtroom. Turns out when you steal from a company and your nephew owns it, the odds aren't exactly in your favor. Word got around too. No one wanted to hire him after that. Eventually, he left town. I heard through the grapevine he was working at a chain hardware store somewhere in Indiana. Inventory, fitting irony. Probably telling people how unfair the world is, how his idiot nephew ruined his life. Let him. He can tell whatever story he wants. I know the truth. I lived it, and I'm still living it, surrounded by people who work with purpose, led by a quiet kid who finally believes in himself, and fueled not by anger, but by clarity. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't shouting. It's building something so solid, so true, that even the loudest voices can't shake it. And walking away without ever looking back. Except maybe once. To smile.